Hi everyone, today we're going to be making the Lizzie Knickers. They're actually a woven fabric cut on the bias and just finished off with some picot elastic. They even just have this like elasticated side seam, which makes them really cute. They take up a minuscule amount of fabric, so they're perfect for stash busting. They're really cute to wear, particularly in the summertime when you just don't want to wear anything because it's just too hot. So perfect for that. I just find them really sweet and I hope you enjoy making them. If you do enjoy making them, please hit the subscribe button and don't forget to hit the little bell up in the top corner so that you'll be notified every time we do a new video. Thanks so much. So this is the back panel of the Lizzie Knicker. As you can see, it's a little wider than we're normally dealing with because of a woven fabric. It reacts differently than if we were making knit underwear, but it's cut on the bias, so we've got a lovely amount of stretch going across the panels here. We also have the front panel and the gusset lining and the gusset outer. We're all cut out, now we're ready to sew. The eagle-eyed amongst you are going to notice this has already been sewn. I actually sewed it and had this the wrong way around, so I've unpicked and started again. But what we're going to do, it is the front panel, the gusset joining up right sides together. Then we're going to take the lining, get rid of the fluff, and with the lining we are going to place the lining so it is right side down, right side to wrong side of the front panel. That way when we pull it backwards after we've sewn the seam, we end up with a completely clean finish here. When I did this incorrectly the first time round, I didn't have that lined up. Now we're going to pin from the center, line up all our edges. I'm going to be sewing this on the overlocker, so I'm just going to go with one pin. Use as many or as little pins as you feel happy with. If you are going on the overlocker, always try and remember to keep your pin coming outwards so it's really easy for you to actually see. Alright, I'm going to go sew this for the second time. I'm sewing this on my overlocker. You can, however, just use your regular machine, and because the seam is going to be entirely encased, you can just use a straight stitch. Alright, for lift, I'm going to have barely anything to cut off this time because I'd already made that mistake where I have already sewn it once the wrong way around. So I'm just going to take off the bare minimum. Leave a nice long tail and cut. Alright, we're going to go back and pin our next seam. Just going to start by tidying up. So we snip, pull till it locks off, snip again, pull and snip. Alright, so this is our gusset joined to our front piece, and as you can see, nice and clean. Nice and clean. Now we're going to attach to our back panel. This involves a little bit of thinking about things as we pin. Again, we're going to start pinning from our center because we've got two very different kind of curve shapes. So if you pin from the center and keep your pins going upright, you'll see that you can get everything to match up. Again, you'll get this kind of bubbling effect, but it's just because you're trying to join two different shaped curves. When you actually sew it straight, you can actually see it will sit flat. It's just very difficult to pin it, which is why I like to pin with a gap between, and that way you have a little bit more room to manipulate and you're less worried about trying to get it super flat. Alright, so pinned. In order to get this to also be a clean finish here, what we're going to do is spin. So the easiest way to do it is to hold one corner and flip it and then take it across the length. Alright, I'm going to do that again so you can see what it is again. So what we want to try and do is we want to enclose this seam. So we're going to flip it. So it goes right side of the gusset lining is going to come across and cover the back one. Now we pin this in place and we get ready to sew the seam. Just before I sew this seam, I was going to show it again. So here it's all pinned back. You can see there's still the little kind of bubbles in between, but it's joined at the center and the two sides. You also notice at the sides there's these little tiny triangles. In pattern making terms, these are called turnbacks, but what it does is it allows you to have a little bit excess, but when you open up a curved line, so imagine like a neckline or something like that, you have those little triangle kind of bits left over. When you open it up, it means there's a continuously curved line of the main fabric. So turnbacks are normally, 5 kind of mil, but once we sew and we pull it, we'll end up with a curved line. So again, we're just going to line up our edge. This time we can cut off a little bit more because, we haven't made a mistake like we did with the first one. Lower our presser foot. I always like to help guide it in a little bit there until I know that the fabric is actually kind of grabbed, because then you don't end up with kind of bunching at the end. Again, I'm just making sure all my edges are lined up between my layers here. Nice long tail and snip. I'm going to go across to the other table so we can reveal the enclosed gusset. So it looks like a little bit of a jumbled mess. That's all going to come out pretty quickly because once we pull, it all kind of snaps into place. So nice clean finish on the outside, nice clean finish on the inside, and the right side of the cotton fabric is facing up. So that's exactly what we wanted. I'm going to tidy these little bits up and then I'm going to overlock all the way around. I'm not going to show that because it's not very interesting, but also that way we can just move straight into going on with our elastic. Today I'm going to be using some really pretty sort of picot elastic. I've chosen a contrast color because not only does it look pretty, it's going to be easier for you to see. Alright, so I'm going to overlock and then we'll be back. Now we've got our gusset in and we're overlocked all the way around. You'll notice that I've left my overlocker on as a 4-thread. You could just do it on a 3-thread, you could just use it as a zigzag on your regular machine. I've just left my 4th in because I've swapped my machine around so many times today while I'm filming that I was just like, yeah, you know what, it doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter. So all we want to do is finish those edges really nicely so we can get ready to put on our elastic. So this is our picot elastic. And with all, you'll find there's normally one side which is shinier than the other. I basically have a look until I figure out which side I like the best and which one I want to be facing outwards. Then weirdly, what we're going to do is we're going to put it on upside down. So we actually will place it on so it goes around so that the trim goes inwards. We're going to sew it on with one pass and then we're going to flip it and top stitch it down. So just you could start pinning it in, and I'm going to move across to the machine. I'm going to show you how to put the tension in for the right amount of stretch and sew it in with our first pass before we top stitch it down. Okay, so we're all set up ready to sew on our elastic. I've lined up my elastic so that the widest part of the elastic section of the picot edge, so not the fancy section, covers my overlocking. And I'm going to drop my presser foot, and I've lined up my needle so that it's just going to sew along here on the edge. I'm just going to get it started with no stretching, no pressure, nothing in the edge whatsoever, literally just getting it started. A little bit of a reverse. I'm using a straight stitch and I've bumped up my straight stitch to be 4.5 mil. So not quite as big as the gathering stitch on my machine, but still pretty big. It's easy to take out if you make a mistake, but it also just allows you to put it in
with a bit of tension without too worry about it. So going to go through tension again. So stretched, tension. Today we want to be somewhere between tension, where you put a little bit of stretch, a little bit of tension into the elastic, and stretch. All right, so we're going to go kind of part way. We're going to keep lining up this edge with the edge of our elastic. You'll notice I don't pin mine. I don't expect anyone to do that. It's how I can feel the tension best in my hands to know whether I am pulling too tight or too little. If it feels floppy, it's too little. If it feels too tight, it is too tight. And unfortunately, there is no magic formula I can give you that's going to make this better. It is practice and knowing your elastics. Alright, so you're getting the idea, and you can see it's gathering in a little bit and we're stitching along the edge. I'm going to keep going all the way along this edge, and then I'm going to come back and show you before I continue on with the rest. So you can see that we've now got the elastic in on both sides. It kind of makes everything go a bit scrunched up and kind of pulls everything in a little bit more, and you start to see the shape of what we're going to go for. Here the elastic's just stitched on, single line of stitching nice and close to the decorative edge, and it covers entirely the overlocking. So whichever way you're going to finish your edges, you want to make sure that it's all closed over. What we're going to do in the next step is we're going to fold the elastic down, and we're going to top stitch along and leave our decorative edge on the outside. You can go along and pin everything down if you can, because then it just makes it kind of everything to sit nice and flat. Again, you don't need to stretch the elastic this time, but we do need to make sure that these edges sit flat. Bit of a press with an iron is very good, but always remember this is cotton and this is highly likely to be polyester or nylon, so don't heat up your iron too much, you'll ruin your elastic and undo all of your good work. Okay, we're at the machine. I'm just going to line up and drop my presser foot, and then I'm just going to carefully take you across and show you the stitch selection I've done for this one. Hopefully you can see this. I've actually chosen a triple stitch zigzag, and what it does is it goes 3 stitches for every zig and every zag. It makes everything nice and sit nice and flat, and it's my preferred kind of one. Regular zigzags work just as well, but if you want that extra bit of flatness, the triple stitch works really well. Okay, back to filming position. Okay, so I'm just going to get it started. Now, because I'm going to do something else to that top edge, I'm not going to do any kind of reverse stitch, because it will get locked off by another stitch, and reversing on top of elastic is not always the best thing. In order to get my stitch line nice and straight, I'm aiming for where my fabric goes in to just meet where my metal and my plastic part of my foot meets. The triple stitch is a relatively slow stitch, so I just kind of let it do its thing. Just keep making sure that you've got this edge tucked under so it sits nice and flat, and keep the kind of bulk of it, everything else away. Alright, I'm just going to speed up my machine a little bit. Makes it a little noisier, but it makes it a little faster. As you get to your seam junction, remember you've got quite a bit of bulk in here. So just slow down and make sure you've got a hand on the back, just in case it needs a little bit of an extra kind of, not even a pull, but just help persuade it to go through a little bit more. Some machines handle that fine, some not so much. Okay, I'm going to continue my top stitching all the way along this side and then all the way along the other side, and then I'm going to come back and show you the finished results. Okay, so we've done all of our top stitching now, and as you can see, it sits super flat along the edges. That treble stitch really does just a great job of making it sit nice and flat, and on this kind of very patterned fabric, it's almost invisible. And you'll notice on the inside, and I have used a contrast color thread to make it nice and easy for you to see, the elastic sits down nice and flat. The entire edge of the elastic has caught very flat. Catching the entire elastic like this makes washing really easy because there's no extra fluffy fiber bits to sort of stick out. So, you know, I'd like to think we all hand wash our lingerie, but I also know, you know, we have lives. So you want to be able to put it into a wash bag, throw it into the washing machine and pull it out, and none of your great, you know, sewing has had any impact through the washing machine. So making sure that edge catches is a really nice kind of way to be able to do that. I'm going to move on to actually doing the elastic along the tops. The Lizzies will actually sit, they still look very puffy. They'll have elastic going along the top, an elastic edge for the side seam basically, so this entire side will just be a line of elastic, and then elastic along the back. Because of these elastic sides, I like to start my elastic on the back so that I can hide the join along this back edge. It's much nicer than having your join on the front edge. So again, just making sure I choose the same edge. I'm going to line it up towards the end, but I'm going to give myself a little tail and start stitching in a little bit. I'm going to go back to our long straight stitch and just top stitch it in along. I'm going to come all the way along the top, measure out my distance for my side seam along the front, and then measure out the distance for the side seam back again. Before you start sewing, to measure out your distance, measure here, add those two together, add approximately 25 to 30 centimeters per side seam. You don't want your side seams to be too tight. Once you have that full measurement, so again that's back, side seam, front, side seam, that's your full circumference. Take your elastic, wrap it around yourself and see if it's going to be too tight. These are quite low, they're very hipster, so make sure you measure it right down low on your body. Wriggle it around until it's at a comfortable amount of stretch. Too tight is uncomfortable, too loose means your pants fall down. So let's get it to a nice comfortable amount, then use that amount. If you're not comfortable doing that, stick with our same amount of stretch / tension that we put in here. Add your 25 to 30 centimeters, 25 to 30 centimeters. If you're very petite and in sort of a size 6 or 8, you're probably going to need more closer to a 15 to 20 centimeters. Everyone else start heading towards the 25 to 30 centimeters. As always, measuring makes the difference. Okay, we're going to get started with that. So I'm leaving myself a little bit of the tail, popping it in underneath the machine, lowering my presser foot. My needle is lined up to this sort of top edge, and I'm just going to get myself started just to line up a bit better. Okay, so no tension at all. Anchor myself in with a reverse stitch, and now I'm just going to kind of put in the same amount of tension that I did earlier. And you can see I'm lining up this top edge so it covers my overlocking edge. That way the overlocking is not going to peek out to the outside of the garment. So I'm going to continue along. I'm actually stitching to the back panel first. I'm going to stitch along and I'll come back and show you when I get to the edge. Okay, so I've just got to the edge here. So this is the back edge, this is the side. this bit's just going to, and all I'm going to do is I'm just going to keep bringing it across. And once I get to the end here, so I'm still adding in my little bit of tension. Just as I get to this sort of the side seam, I guess it is, I'm just going to hit reverse. I'm going to do it twice just to anchor myself in. Now I've measured out, and the pin here shows me 20 centimeters. I'm making a size 10 pair of knickers today. My elastic is quite soft and rather stretchy. So if I went to the sort of 25 sort of plus, it would be too large for this size of knicker based on the softness and stretchiness of my elastic. So I've gone with 20 centimeters. So here I can literally just like cut off using the auto cut function on my machine, or you know, you could have just cut as normal. Keep your elastic straight. No twisting at this point in time. I'm going to line it back up to the front, and we've literally got like a little join. With the front, I'm going to position that pin that marks my measurement point over on that side seam. Get this excess out of the way. Drop my presser foot. Line everything up, reverse, and now I can go in and do my front panel, and then I'm going to, once I get to the end of my front panel, I will do the same measurement again. So we'll get back to showing you that while I do this section. So here I am, I'm at the top and meeting the side seam of the front, and I have attached the elastic along the front panel. Once I get to this side seam, I'm going to measure without stretch my 20 centimeters. And I'm going to pop a pin there as my measurement point. I'm going to continue putting in my little bit of tension. All the way to my edge point. Lock it off with a few reverse stitches and then cut. Again, being careful not to twist our elastic, keeping it nice and straight. I'm going to line up so that I've got my edge and my elastic here. Now we've still got our little tail section here. What I want to try and do is make the transition as neat as possible. So I'm going to flap that section that way. This one's going to come over the top, and I'm going to stitch basically from here to here. I hope you can see that. It's sort of a couple of centimeters, an inch or so. So I'm going to pop it in, lower the presser foot as I've lined up, check. I'm just going to stitch along that edge, come onto the garment, and then hit reverse. And then I'm going to use the auto cut function, take it out. So I'll trim here with my scissors, and I'll trim here, but it does mean that when we flip up, we'll end up with a nicer transition than having like a really obvious join at this point. So at this stage, it kind of looks a little bit of a hot mess, but that's okay because it's meant to look like that at this point. So being very careful to not cut the strings of the side seams you've just made, we're going to cut off the excess of our long tail of picot elastic. I'm going to go in here. So this is where it all kind of joins up. And we've got this excess piece coming over here. So I'm just going to tuck the edges away and just take it off as well. And I'm just going to trim up my little sections here at the same time because I like it when it all looks neat. Alright, so we have the elastic the whole way round now. We don't need our excess. What we're going to do is we're going to do our top stitching along our top edges just as we did here. Before we want to top stitch, you can see if we fold here, we get this kind of mess happening here. The trick is hold it with your thumb, figure out which bit you want to cut away. Try not to cut your fabric because we don't want that fabric to fray. Your elastic will fray less. So you can take that away and then it will actually get covered with your top stitching. So do a little bit of trimming on each of your corners and then we're going to top stitch. See, much neater transition from garment to side seam. This edge is all tidied up. We're going to pop it in underneath the machine. Line up this edge of where our fabric meets our picot elastic with where the plastic meets the metal section of our foot. I've swapped the machine back across to a 3-step zigzag. Reposition there, so I'm right on the edge and start stitching. Now here I actually do want a little bit of strength, so I actually am going to hit my reverse and go back. It's just going to do a couple of extra ones. Now again, tuck in underneath this section so that our edge of our elastic points down into the knickers. Just gonna give a little bit of persuasion to that edge. And again, you can see as we top stitch, we're not stretching our elastic, we're just keeping our fabric nice and flat. And some of this kind of bubbling of the fabric is the nature of the fact that it is bias cut and then we have added elastic, so it's lovely to wear, but it just means you're just going to use your hands a fraction more when you're actually stitching. So we're just coming up to the edge. We're going to keep coming right to the edge of the fabric and then we're going to do a little bit of reverse just to hold it in place. If I wasn't using a contrasting thread, so if all of my elastic and all of my thread colors match, you could come onto your elastic a fraction if you needed to sort of hold that down, like if you've got one that's got a very roughly edge or something like that. But for the most part, as long as you've anchored in the fabric section, you're going to be going okay. If your fabric is very fine, or perhaps you are using a fold over elastic, which you can use for this style, though it does make sewing it more difficult, you might want to add like a little bar tack there for some extra strength. Alright, so I'm just doing a little bit of reverse, and then I'm going to cut. So as you can see, nice and flat and all joined all the way along the edge. Now we're going to do the same to the back.
I really hope you enjoyed making the Lizzie knickers with us today. They're just really cute, super sweet, and like I said, take up minuscule amounts of fabric. Don't take long to make, so it's a really good entryway into having a really cute knicker drawer. If you like making these kinds of things and you want to see more videos, please hit the subscribe button, hit the bell up the top so you can be notified whenever there's a new video, and tell all your friends about it so we can keep making some more videos. Alright, bye for now.